写了一本新书，叫《道歉》，然后把它引进来，然后很高兴心灵工坊又把它翻成中文。这是一个很重要的一本书，它的出版呢，在美国引起非常非常大的回响，现在也开始蔓延到其他世界各地。那其实Eve Ensler我们都知道，他非常的有影响力，他每一件事呢都是世界级的，而且超级的影响很多的人。所以我想我在这边也要跟大家报告，我们今天也要宣布启动道歉计划。所以现在就让我们欢迎Eve Ensler。
So the reason I wrote this book, I think there are two main reasons I wrote the book. The first is that I was raped by my father when I was 5 years old, and the sexual abuse continued for 5 years. When it stopped, he began to beat me and physically batter me, almost to the point of murdering me a couple of times. So I always believed that one day my father would apologize, that he'd wake up and he'd realize he'd come out of his narcissistic, belligerent haze, and he'd look at me and he'd realize what he had done, and he'd get down on his knees and he'd apologize and he'd explain it. And guess what? That never happened. My father's been dead for 31 years, and there hasn't been a day in that time where I haven't waited for that apology. All survivors of violence, of rape, of oppression, of any kind of harm secretly long and yearn for an apology. Okay, that's the first reason. The second reason is I have been working now in the movement to end violence against all women and girls for over 25 years. In this time, I have seen women break the silence, tell their stories, open shelters, go to therapy, heal themselves, speak out. In all that time, and with the recent iteration of Me Too, I have never heard a man make a public, authentic, deep, sincere, self-interrogated public apology for sexual violence or domestic violence. My dear friend Tony Porter, who runs an organization called A Call to Men, says we've called men out, now's the time to call them in. And I love that. It's we can't just keep telling our stories. We can't continue to be raped and brutalized and then tell more stories. Men have to change. Men have to change. And so I started to think the fact that there's never been a public apology in 16,000 years of patriarchy, none that anyone knows or recorded one, because I've asked many people, there must be something very significant about an apology. And I don't mean a simple apology like I'm sorry if you feel bad, or I'm sorry if it hurt you. I don't mean that. So I decided I was going to write the apology in my father's voice, with my father's words, to myself, that I needed to hear. That is the origin of the book. It was a very strange experience writing this book. It was both very spiritual and very beyond me. You know, I feel like once I made the determination to write it, my father came to visit, and he was present through all of the writing of it. And although it was a conjuring, although it was my imagination, I began to learn things about my father that he had never told me and that I had never known. And I think one of the reasons for that is that when people invade our bodies, they live inside us. They actually stay inside us. And sometimes we know our perpetrators better than we know ourselves. So it was stages. I think that I began to create the anatomy of an apology to see what a true apology is. And the first stage was for my father to go back into his childhood, to look at the roots of the violence in him, in his family, and in the culture of patriarchy. And what I discovered was that my father was born 15 years after his last sibling, and so he was an accident who became a miracle. And so my father was idealized. He was held up as a king. He was where the sun set. But I have to tell you, to idolize someone is not the same as loving them. When we idolize people, we project our own idea of who they're supposed to be onto them, and then people have to live up to that idea, rather than getting to be the human being that they actually are. And I think we do this with boys. I think boys get born and they're just the kings, they're the best, they can do no wrong, whatever they do is perfect, and actually this doesn't help our boys. Well, I have to say, many survivors will not be able to get apologies from their perpetrators. I hope that there are men here, for example, who, whether you've offended or not, think about what an apology is and how you could encourage other men who you may know who have offended to really begin this process. Because it's a process, it's a commitment, it's a sacred commitment to change. And I think we can either punish people and throw them against the wall for life and say you're done and you're fired and you're finished, or we can invite men to engage in a process which would actually change their souls. But for survivors who can't get an apology, I will tell you this is the most powerful exercise I've ever done. It is so transformative, it is so intense, but one of the things that happens in it is that you move the perpetrator who lives inside you from this terrifying beast who is always hovering over you into a broken child. You move him from this monstrous person to an apologist. And in doing so, they lose agency over you, right? They stop having power over you. The imagination is so powerful. It is our superpower. Women have been doing this at City of Joy, our survivors, and they're having incredible results, really working on this transformative process of writing letters to themselves from their perpetrators. And I want to say something really wonderful that's been happening on the tour with this book, because I've been all over America and in Canada and in Europe and now here. Men have been writing me amazing letters. I've really begun to hear from men who are saying, I need to make an apology. And I feel like if men can go and sit with clergy or sit with social workers or sit with therapists or sit with friends and really begin this process, it is so profoundly liberating. Because here's the deal. No one who has done something terrible to somebody else in this lifetime gets out of here clean. It haunts you, it stays with you, and it will haunt you in the next world as well. So what apologies do is they not only free the victim, they free the perpetrator, so the perpetrator can go on and become another kind of person who isn't held forever in his own internal hell by the action he has done.
我们在做这个道歉计划，我们设计了一个网页给大家，包括我们说的加害者、受害者，甚至旁边的重要他人，都能够上这个道歉计划，写下你们想说的话，等于提供了一个平台要给大家。那不晓得Eve可不可以给我们更多的建议，让这个道歉计划真的能够在台湾被实践？
Well, I think it's fantastic that you have this platform. But I think treat apologies like prayer. We all have to get familiar with the practice. And it's something you have to work at, right? Sometimes you can do a good apology, sometimes you do a bad apology. But you can get better and better at apologizing. I lived with a man for 15 years, and in 15 years, he never once apologized. In 15 years! I'm not with him anymore, okay? But you can't live with someone who can't apologize. How do you move through life without apology? So I would say, practice apologizing everywhere you go. Practice how to apologize. Learn how to apologize. It's such a beautiful thing. It is a form of prayer. It is a form of honoring. It's a form of reverence. It's a form of love. And I've got to look at myself and understand what made me do that. What were the dark impulses in me that were operating at that moment that made me say that to you that I wasn't conscious of. And then you get to go on. So we're not stuck with all this bitterness and resentment and revenge and all these things that are harboring in us when people don't apologize to us. I think it begins always with yourself, right? If I've done something wrong and I feel bad about what I've done, I sit and I ask myself why I've done it. I really investigate my motives. And then I try to go to whoever I've offended and sit with them and say, I'm really sorry I harmed you. I'm really sorry I did this. And let me explain to you what I was doing and what I learned about myself when I started to investigate what I did. And I'm really sorry I brought you pain. What I discover about apologies is when you make them, it's over. It's over. People are very willing to set you free and be done. And if they're not, that's okay, because you've set you free. You're not walking around with the terrible feeling that you did something to someone and it becomes like another, you know what I mean? We're like full of non-apologies. They're all over our bodies. They're like toxins. You know, it's like sickness. Oh, there's a non-apology, there's a non-apology, there's a non-apology. They're all over us. But every time you apology, you get rid of some toxic thing that you don't need to be carrying around. And I want to say this is particularly addressed to men because women are always apologizing. Okay? We apologize all the time. I don't think we need to really work on that habit. My middle name was I'm sorry for many years. Okay?
哇，我们的时间到了，非常非常谢谢Eve这么样的一个分享，我觉得很震动我们的心哦，而且我们也被感动。我相信这些感动我们可以带回去化为行动。今天非常谢谢大家的莅临，